This is something that so many people have asked me about over the years, and I've worked with couples about how to handle difficult conversations. And it is a very tricky, as you can imagine. If you've not been married, you can just imagine what this is like about having conversations that you may not want to have with your spouse. And you who are married, you understand this very well if you've been married for any length of time, because it is challenging. I've been married for 38 years, and we've had different times in our or different seasons of our relationship where these conversations have to be had, and they're not easy, right? They're ones that poses potential challenges, but not only that, it can be where, if not handled correctly, not handled well, can really spiral into things that, obviously, if you've been married, you know what I'm talking about. So many people have had breakups, where it have led to divorce, have had separations. They've had moments where they've slept in different rooms or different locations because of how they handled or mishandled difficult conversations. I was speaking to someone in recent times, and this person was saying they wish they were better equipped of in the way that they went about talking about conversations with their spouse. And they were saying to me, in one of our confidential sessions, they said, I wish I knew how to bring this topic up with my spouse. I wish I had a better way. It seems like there's not enough time. It seems like we just never find the time, or whenever I want to bring it up, it's never convenient, or it's not the right time, or many of those kind of things that they hear. And so the question becomes, how do you handle difficult conversation with your spouse when you've had those moments? How have that ended? I can tell you, in my experience as a licensed marriage and family therapist, working with couples for almost 2 decades, and in my as a certified relationship coach, I can tell you that I have dealt with and worked with couples or a spouse that really have said it did not end well. And I've heard often is that we just don't know how to have a conversation or talk about difficult topics. So the question becomes, what are difficult topics? Well, it could be about finances, right? Especially when there's stressors in the family. And if you're experiencing stress in the family around finances, and one person is more of a spender and one is a saver, they save more money. That becomes an area of conflict. Difficult conversation about raising the children, about how they're experiencing respect, especially in public, and they felt like that spouse may have not handled that well, and they want to talk about that. Maybe it's a something they're planning and they want to do and want to have a conversation, and it becomes very, very challenging. So the question becomes, how do you handle those situations? I would love to hear from you if you're watching this, whether the live, or you can comment below, or I would love to hear from you what it is for you. But I can tell you, and as you know very well, it can be very challenging, right? So I want to share with you then some ideas of how to handle the difficult conversation. Now, why are difficult conversations important? Why are they important? For a number of reasons. They're important because what happened is that when they're not had, someone is building up things on the inside. It could be resentment because they feel like they just don't know how to speak to their spouse, or their spouse doesn't allow them the opportunity to talk about this issue because they either dismiss them, or don't have the time for that, or don't want to talk about it. And so they feel like they have to carry this with them. And so it builds resentment. It creates a distancing in the relationship. So what happened is that when they're not had, it's just what begins to happen. It eats away. It resentment, I mentioned before, distancing. And so people begin to shut down, and you can feel the tension in the air in the relationship, because when it's not handled, like I said, it's going to go somewhere. And many times it's also deflected. So you may have one spouse who seems to be so distant, and they're asking, what's the problem? What's going on? What's the issue? Because they feel that. And it could be where the children, if there's young kids involved, that it's being taken out on the children or on the animal or something else, right? And the person may start putting their energy into something else. Sometimes it's into vices, or it could be into, unfortunately, sometimes other relationship where they may feel like someone may want to listen to them because their spouse is not listening. So it's very important then to have these difficult conversations, as difficult as they might be. But the question becomes how. It becomes how do you do that? And that's what we're talking about here in this. We're talking about here tonight. Now, um, one of those things that I think is so important when you're going to have these difficult conversations, and is to choose the right time and place. Sometimes this is a reason why difficult conversations are not had. And maybe one spouse do not want to have these conversations because they're thinking, why the time they choose is could be right after work, right? It could be at a moment where this person is feeling things are going so well in the relationship, and they're thinking, don't mess up a good thing. So the right time and place is so important. But it's not just the right time and place, because the question becomes, what is the right time? What is the right place? He said, well, there's never seemed to be a right time. Well, there is. There can be a right time, and a right place can be created, but it must be co-created. It's where you're going to have to also set up parameters, set up the rules of engagement that are so important when you are going to have this conversation, because you need to know what are the rules. What are some things that should happen and should not happen when you're having this difficult conversation? So both persons have to be very aware of what you're working with. It's like going into a game, right? If you have in a sports, every sport event have rules of engagement. So a referee and the players know, they know what is right from wrong. They know what a foul is. They know when they get out of bounds. They know because they understand the game. It's also true in a relationship, in a marriage, that you have to have in this place you're going to create. I call it a safe space, right? A safe emotional space where you're going to have this difficult conversation, whatever that might be. And it has to be approached in the right way. It has to be approached by preparing for the moment, and so it has to be well timed. I love, I'm a person of faith, and I love what Ecclesiastes, where Solomon says this: there's a time and a place for everything, right? A time and a place for everything. And so even having a difficult conversation, there's a right time and a right place for that. And it's important you have to figure out what that is for you, and know the rhythm of your relationship, know the rhythm of your marriage, because it's in that rhythm you're going to find what is best for you as a couple. So choose the right time and place is one of the most important thing. And I call it, make sure it's safe. Make sure you have the rules of engagement of what happens in that that space you've created, right? So for example, it could be where you create rules of engagement. How do you disengage if things are going south? They're going out of it's spiraling downward. What do you need to do? So that's part of the rules of engagement. What do you do when one person is speaking, and set up speaker listener kind of interaction that is respected and honored in that place? So these are some of those things that needs to happen in this safe space, safe emotional space, when you choose the right time and the right place for this kind of engagement like I described just now. The other thing that's important is start with I statements. I statements is so important. Maybe you have heard this before. And I find sometimes people, oh, what's I statements? What does that mean? It means that you're going to share things that are privy to you. You speak about the things that you're experiencing, what emotions you're experiencing, what thoughts you're having. So you start from a place of I, because you want to not be in a blame moment. So what happened is sometimes people will say, you do these things, you cause this, you respond this way, you react this way, and they hear you. Whenever you hear the word you, people generally become defensive. They're going to become defensive, and they will begin to shut down because they start hearing attack, they hear an accusation, they hear allegation because it's you. So the I statement simply means you speak about what it is you're experiencing as a result of what is happening or not happening. So when you are talking about the things that are difficult, start with I statements. What have your thoughts been about that matter? What have your feelings been about the matter? And you begin to take that personal responsibility for your feelings and for your thoughts. When you're taking the personal responsibility, that is more going to be an I statement presentation, and your spouse will be more apt to hear that because they're saying at least you're not accusing them, blaming them for what's happening in that relationship, and they'll respect that a whole lot more. So start with I statements. Practice active listening. You may have heard this before, because there is listening and there is listening, right? What tends to happen most times in relationships is people hear things and they interrupt. They will say, I know what you're thinking, I know what you're about to say. And so that will happen is what they'll do is jump right in and interrupt your thoughts. They will want to finish your sentence. That is not what a safe space we mentioned earlier that needs to be. That's one of those things you put up in rules of engagement is you're going to practice active listening. Active listening means you cannot be on your phone while you're listening. Active listening means you cannot be distracted by something else and say, oh, I'm multitasking, I'm hearing you. No, you're not. Active listening means you have undivided attention, because it's part of active listening. It means I'm listening to you. I'm not just hearing you. I'm listening. I'm listening for the tone. I'm listening for the emotions that are part of that. So when you're listening that well, your partner should know that you understand how they felt about something and what that feeling have generated in them. So when you're doing active listening, you should be able to um, feedback to your spouse what they have just not just said in a rote way where you're going to be parroting what they're saying word for word. No, you're going to digest that, almost like food intake. Digest it, think about it, and then you're going to bring that back up. And that sounds kind of gross, right? The more I think about that just now, but you're going to bring that up in a way where he or she hears that you understand. And it also gives them an opportunity to possibly change what it is they said, because they may have heard and realized they did not present it very well. And so active listening allows that person to either confirm what you have fed back to them as to what they're saying. And so what active listening has a very, very important component that I teach in my courses, I teach in my, coaching, is that I call it the curious questions, the curious questions. Active listening must have curious questions where you are going to ask questions out of curiosity because of something you've just heard that you did not understand before, you didn't hear before, and that person knows you've listened to them because you've actively done that. And that's very, very, very important as well, called active listening. Okay. Now, the other thing that is so important is focus on problem solving, not blame. Focus on problem solving, not blame. When you are having difficult conversation, your spouse should hear that you're focusing on the problem and not blaming them for the problem. See the difference? You're focusing on the problem, not blaming them for the problem. You say, Kingsley, well, what do you mean not blaming them for the problem? They are the problem. So I got to blame them. No. I understand. They may have been a reason for what it is you're experiencing. And that is true. So we don't want to somehow minimize or refute that. That's true. However, if you're going to have constructive and productive conversation in this difficult conversation, you want to make it as easy as possible. So yes, it's difficult, But how can you lessen the difficulty? And one of those ways is to focus on problem solving, meaning, I call that externalizing the problem. So imagine the problem being something as a third party, and you're talking about that as an external thing, and you're both kind of coming up ways is how you can solve this problem. So when you are focusing on solving the problem and not blaming the problem on someone else, your partner, your spouse will have a better chance. We want to listen and want to be able to work with you to solve the problem together. Because what happened is they're hearing you willing to work with them to solve the problem. Even though they may have caused the problem, they're hearing team effort, teamwork to solve the problem together. So focus on problem solving and not on blame. And that's very, very important. Now, also, then take breaks if needed. Take breaks if needed. Now, this is a very important one, but here's what I find that this is also mishandled many times in relationships. Why? Because you're in a conversation, and what tends to happen is one person gets upset and they walk away. That is not constructive. That is not what a safe space creation and rules of engagement should look like. In that rules of engagement, one of the things you want to establish is how do you disengage if things are going out of, kind of getting degraded, things are somehow, spiraling downward. How do you create still to maintain productivity and constructive conversation is when you take breaks if it's needed. And one of the things I teach about this is that the person who chooses to disengage, and it should not be where they walk away and will say, I'm doing that for the sake of the marriage, the sake of the relationship. No, it has to be co-created. It has to be something that you both have decided upon ahead of time so that you can now, when it's done, both parties understand we're doing this for the relationship's sake. And one of the things I teach is that the person that disengages, requests to disengage, should be the person who re-engage, should be the person who follows up and makes certain that they re-engage in a healthy manner, not unhealthy. And so one of the things I teach and I coach people on, and I also counsel with, is help them establish what does disengagement looks like and what does re-engagement looks like and who does it. How do you re-engage in a way that is productive and constructive? Because sometimes re-engagement may come back where you went away for a while and you come back reinforced with fire in your eyes and you're steaming because you went and you think about what just happened and you just get worked up and you come in with a vengeance. That is not what it should look like, because that's not productive. It's not going to help you. And that's why I say it's important to take breaks during the time, but it must be agreed upon. And that's why I may have put here, take agreed upon breaks that both persons have agreed upon as part of protecting the relationship rather than destroying the relationship. Another thing is to validate your partner's feelings. Validate your partner's feelings. This is what I find doesn't happen too often because we're so rushed to give our point of view when we're having difficult conversations. We want to chime in and tell this person what we're feeling and thinking, but we did not take time to validate the other person, and so they feel unheard, which now creates another problem. And that's what I find many times in relationships, in marriages. Another problem is created from a problem that they're trying to solve. Because what happened is the person who is sharing doesn't feel heard. They don't feel understood. And most spouse, or every spouse, I would say, everybody really wants to be understood, right? I'm sure you, as you're watching this and listening to this, you would say, yes, I do in any conversation. I want to feel understood. I want to feel heard. Can I tell you that and this is not exaggeration, I would say 98% of people that come to me to work with them on their relationship, they come and they say the problem is we just don't communicate effectively, or we just don't talk to each other as we should. And in part of that, it will say, I don't feel heard. I don't feel heard. I don't think my spouse, my husband, my wife have ever heard me. I don't feel understood. I feel dismissed, everything else but understood and heard. Why? Because they have not validated the partner's feelings. And there's a way that that person knows when they are being validated. They know when their spouse is listening because of what is said and how it's said. So what needs to happen is, if you're going to have, or not if, but when you have these difficult conversations, you've got to be able to let your partner feel validated, because they don't feel validated, they're going to leave that and still feel unheard, still feel hurt, and even probably hurt even deeper, because now they have tried to have this conversation. It didn't go as was planned. And now what have that has taught the relationship is this: don't come and try this again. Don't even do it, because it's going to end up the same way. And I've heard that over and over again, where people will say, Kingsley, it's not that we haven't tried. And I'm saying, well, maybe it's not that you tried, is how you tried. Because they may have tried, and what happened is this very thing. They felt unheard, and they walk away, and they felt like, you know what? I give up. It's not worth it. I'm not going to be bothered. And so they just don't do it again. And that's what happens many times in relationships, right? They feel very unheard. And so it needs to be validated. So that partner needs to feel validated before they ever want to move on from where they are. Now, this is also very, very important. And one of the very most important thing is where, again, going back to that very, that if the first part I mentioned earlier, and why I said that is so important and so crucial, and that's why I started with that, is setting up a safe space, a safe zone, the timing and the place. Why? Because you want to have these parts of that to be set up. When I mentioned about rules of engagement, this needs to be one of those things where, you're maintaining respectful communication, and you have to decide what's respectful. So, when I teach couples on these things, or whether it's group coaching, individual coaching, or counseling, I will help them to talk about what respect looks like. I have some ideas, but maybe my ideas may not be what that couple really wants, because they may, shy away from, or don't think that in their world that's a disrespectful thing. But I will start with them and say, okay, let's establish what are the respectful things. What are the things you feel disrespected about? And what happened is you have to put those inside in the safe space. I mentioned earlier at the slide I showed earlier, is that safe space is where you're going to put these rules of engagement. And one of those have to be maintaining respectful communication at all times. You've got to be respectful to each other. That means you're going to have to listen. You can't, no interruption, no idea. I know what you're going to say. I know what you're thinking. And, no, as hard as it is to hear things. And that's why I mentioned the I statements earlier is so important, because the I statement is why a person will listen to the hardest, most difficult thing and still feel as if they can solve the problem together. Why? Because they're not feeling judged. They don't feel blamed. They don't feel accused. They don't feel attacked. And so it creates an opportunity to have a better chance to solve the problem and leave that moment feeling hopeful rather than hopeless and helpless, right? That's what tends to happen most times. People feel hopeless and helpless, and that's why they don't do it. So what I'm doing is creating a more hopeful and helpful environment, so the relationship can say, you know what, man, this went very well. Let's do more of this. And that's deeper. That's where you go deeper in the relationship. And I know that many couples I know don't know what it is to go deep. And this is what difficult conversation is. It's not just to get into, is people say, oh, we're going to get in a fight. No, no, no. It's to go deep. It's to really create intimacy. I love one of the definitions I've heard so often is intimacy is into me and see. Into me and see. So what you're doing here is getting into that person to see how they're thinking and feeling, truly thinking and truly feeling. And when you're able to do that, that creates intimacy. That creates a message to the relationship. You know what? We can do this. We can do this. And so that relationship will look forward to having conversations that may once be forbidden, that never talk about. Now you're looking forward to talking about them, because you've set up the right winning formula for that. Okay. Now, this one here happens to be I think, is one of the most important ones that should be at the very beginning. And if you're a person of faith, which I'm a person of faith, and I believe in prayer, because this is so key. why do I have this at the end and not at the beginning? When you're able to have the conversation as I've outlined, then you're going to put this is like the bow on the wrap around the gift, the box. You're going to bow tie it in a bow, and that comes through prayer, where you're able to pray for one another. You know you've had a good conversation, and you've really touched handled it well when you're able to pray at the end. If you can't pray at the end, that means something did not happen in from the very beginning to the end. It something that was off, right? And that's why I how I set up this sequence of way things are the way things should be is so that you can have a place of unity at the end. You can come together and feel like, you know what, this was very helpful. We feel very hopeful, and because you feel hopeful and it's helpful, you can pray together and really seal that moment through prayer. So some people may want to journal, some people may want to meditate, but I think, from my perspective, prayer is where you're asking God to really shine in and seal what you've just done, because that is a very sacred thing you've just done. It's a sacred conversation. I call it a sacred moment. So why not invite the divine, invite God in to seal what you've just done? And I think when you're able to do this, you truly have gone in a deeper moment. And again, I would love to hear at any point anything you've heard that was helpful. I would love for you to let me know. Give me some feedback. You can make some comments, and also you could also hit that like button at some point, and make sure you subscribe to the channel, because this is really what I want to kind of do this more on a regular basis. So here's what I want to do here at this moment is I want to go through ask you a question here, and which would be most challenging? Which of these 8 things I mentioned would be most challenging, and why? Now, this is where you could respond and let me know which of these you find. So, is it number one, choosing the right time and place? Is it number two, how to do the I statements or doing I statements? Is it number three, practicing active listening? What about number four, focus on problem solving, not blame? What about number five, take breaks if needed? Number six, validate your partner's feelings. Number seven, maintain respectful communication. Or number eight, deepen your deepen your what did I mention again? Deepen your connection by praying together. So I would love to hear which of these would be most challenging for you, and why. Why? So again, this is where we can have this ongoing conversation. And so this is where you're going to. This is your part. And so I'd love for you. I'm going to leave you with this, to look at this list, and what would be most challenging and why. Because maybe the reason why it's most challenging is probably one of the things that I discussed, or one or more, that was not properly done. And I would almost say it's the very beginning, setting up an emotional safe space, the right time and place. I think if that can be done right, then everything else will flow very smoothly. And again, I think that's really what it comes down to. And I would love to hear your thoughts on what it is for you. Which of these 8 things I discussed you would find most challenging, and why? Why would it be most challenging? This is where you come in, as I mentioned before. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. Okay. Now, this is the goal. The goal of what we're doing here is just trying to make sure that at the end of the day, that you end up having a relationship that looks this way, right? I call it happier marriage secrets. That's the kind of relationship you want to have. And I pray this for your marriage. I pray this for your relationship. I pray that this will be the true. And so I think this is ultimately the goal for us, is to get to a happier place. And whatever is preventing you from this, then we should be able to talk about and get that fixed. And so I want to thank you for taking the time to watch and to listen. And I truly enjoy this moment, and I want to do this more often. And so I want to encourage you to get that notification when it does come. So when I do go live on a weekly basis, talking about different topics about, connecting strong, how to connect strong, what does that look like? I want to be able to make sure you are notified, so you can join me here when we do these live broadcasts. Okay. So thank you for being here. May God bless you. And I do hope that you and your partner, your spouse, have a great marriage. Happy marriage to you, and go and connect strong. God bless. And I see you on the next live. Thank you.